A lonely billionaire decides to adopt an entire village of underprivileged children, but when he discovers what they really want, everyone is moved. The glow from the laptop screen reflected on the floor-to-ceiling window, blending with the city lights 30 floors below. Robert Anderson loosened his Italian silk tie and leaned back in his ergonomic leather chair. His eyes burned after hours of studying financial reports, the figures dancing in his mind like tiny points of light. The digital clock on the wall showed 11:47 p.m., another night like all the others in the penthouse of Anderson Tower. The marble walls and multi-million-dollar works of art seemed to watch him in silence, mute witnesses to his lonely routine. An original Picasso on his right was worth more than most people would earn in several lifetimes, but he hadn't bothered to really look at it for months. His fingers drummed on the tempered glass table while the city pulsed below. The steady tapping echoed through the vast empty space, competing only with the faint hum of the air conditioning. So many years spent building an empire, and for what? The coffee had gone cold in the French porcelain cup, a gift from some business partner whose name he no longer remembered. In the master suite bathroom, the automatic light came on as he entered. The mirror reflected the image of a 50-year-old man that others would call well-preserved, strategically trimmed grey hair, mild wrinkles that spoke more of experience than age, a tailored suit that concealed the endless hours spent in meetings. But his eyes looked like they belonged to someone else, someone far older and more exhausted than his appearance suggested. He returned to his desk, his Italian shoes sinking into the carpet that had cost more than a luxury car. The laptop screen flickered with a new notification. Robert moved the cursor to close it, as he did with dozens of others every day, but something stopped him. A small headline in the corner of the screen read, "Remote village with children who lack basic education for 3 generations." His eyes scanned the words repeatedly. The images showed smiling faces despite clay walls, children playing in the red dirt, dreams bigger than the dusty horizon around them. The contrast with his world of steel and glass was so stark it almost hurt. Robert stood up abruptly, his chair spinning empty behind him. He placed his hand on the cold glass of the window, watching his reflection overlap with the city lights. Every minute of his 50 years had been dedicated to adding more zeros to his bank account, adding more floors to his glass tower of solitude. Memories long buried under spreadsheets and financial reports began to resurface. His own father, a devoted teacher who died without ever understanding his son's obsession with money and power. "True wealth, Robert," he would often say, "is in the eyes of someone who has just learned something new." Back then, those words sounded like the naive philosophy of a man who would never know luxury. Now, 3 decades later, they weighed on his chest like lead. The phone rang and his personal assistant's photo flashed on the screen. Thomas, always efficient, always concerned with his boss's immaculate schedule. Robert let it ring once, twice, 3 times before picking up. "Mr. Anderson, sorry for calling this late, but I need to confirm a few details for tomorrow's 9 a.m. shareholders meeting. The board is especially interested in your proposal for expansion in Asia." "And cancel," Robert interrupted, his voice firmer than he felt. "I'm sorry, sir." "Cancel the meeting, Thomas. Actually, cancel all my appointments for the next few days." The silence on the other end of the line was almost palpable. In 15 years of working together, Robert had never cancelled a board meeting. "Are you feeling all right? Would you like me to call a doctor?" "I'm fine." And for the first time in a long while, that wasn't a lie. "I need you to arrange something else. Have my personal car prepared, the Land Rover." "The Land Rover? The one you never use?" "That's right. And I don't want a driver." "But sir, the shareholders meeting, the pending contract, they can wait. For the first time in my life, Thomas, I've found something that can't." He hung up before hearing any further objections. He walked into his closet, larger than many apartments, passing by rows of suits until he found something more suitable for his journey. Jeans he had barely worn, boots he had bought on a whim, a simple shirt. Each piece still had its tag, waiting for an adventure he had always postponed, for yet another meeting, another contract, more zeros in his account. In the private garage, the black Land Rover glistened under the lights. A powerful machine he had purchased impulsively and never really driven. He tossed a small bag onto the back seat and got behind the wheel, feeling the cold leather under his hands. The GPS already displayed the route. It would be hours on the road, mostly on secondary highways. As the garage gate opened, the city was still asleep. Robert Anderson, the man who had built an empire of steel and glass, drove away from his crystal tower for the first time without a business meeting as his destination. The sun began to rise on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold, while he left behind the only world he knew. With every mile taking him away from the city, he felt the weight of the last 30 years dissolve. The wide avenues gave way to smaller roads, the perfect asphalt turned into dirt, and the skyscrapers in the rearview mirror were replaced by an endless horizon. For the first time in decades, he was about to build something that couldn't be measured in dollars or square feet. Surprisingly, the thought made him feel richer than any deal he had ever closed. The Land Rover rattled as its wheels hit the final stretch of dirt road. Robert slowed down, allowing the red dust to settle on the once spotless black paint. The air conditioning could no longer keep out the heat pouring in through the windows, and beads of sweat began to form on his fine Egyptian cotton shirt. After the last curve, the village appeared like a faded painting from another time. Simple adobe houses were scattered in an irregular pattern, some with tin roofs glinting under the morning sun. Chickens pecked freely among unfenced yards, and a skinny dog raised its head to watch the approaching vehicle. Robert parked in the shade of an old tree, the luxurious engine falling silent for the first time in hours. The contrast between his vehicle and the modest homes was jarring. The Land Rover's price tag alone could probably rebuild half the village. His feet touched the red earth, and the heat traveled up through his expensive boots, which had never tread on ground that wasn't asphalt. An elderly woman swept the front of her home, pausing to watch him with a mix of surprise and distrust. Her dress, worn but impeccably clean, had more dignity than any designer suit in his closet. "Good morning," he tried, his voice sounding strange in the village's silence. The woman responded with a hesitant nod before retreating inside, leaving her broom leaning against the chipped wall. Robert began to walk, his steps raising small clouds of dust. An abandoned school stood out at the center of the village, its broken windows like empty eyes gazing at a present that shouldn't exist. Laughter caught his attention. He followed the sound until he came across a small group of children playing marbles in the dirt. Among them was a girl about 5 years old who stood out, not because she was part of the game, but because she sat slightly apart, focused on something she was drawing in the dirt with a stick. "Hi," she said when she noticed his presence, surprising him with her casual tone. "Your car is really pretty. Looks like the ones on TV." "Thanks," Robert replied, an involuntary smile forming. "My name is Robert. What's yours?" "Emily," she answered, turning her attention back to the drawings in the dirt. "Do you know how to read?" The simple, direct question hit him like a punch to the gut. "Yes, I do." Her eyes lit up with an intensity that made his chest tighten. "Could you tell me what it says over there?" She pointed to an old, faded sign on the school's wall. Robert moved closer, sitting on a fallen log beside her. "Santa Clara Public School," he read aloud. "School," Emily repeated, trying to copy the letters in the dirt with her stick. "My mum said that when she was little, there was a teacher here. But she left a long time ago." A young woman appeared in a nearby doorway, wiping her hands on an apron. "Emily, don't bother the—" She trailed off when she noticed Robert for the first time. "I'm sorry, sir. She's very curious." "She's not bothering me," Robert assured, standing up. "Actually, A shout interrupted him. In the main street, a man ran carrying a child in his arms, heading toward an old pickup truck parked under a tree. "What happened?" Robert asked, following the small commotion that was forming. "It's John's son," someone replied. "High fever since yesterday. Needs to get to the clinic, but the truck won't start." Robert didn't hesitate. "My car is over there. I can take him." The next few minutes were a blur of action. Soon they were back on the road, the Land Rover's air conditioning finally serving a purpose bigger than comfort, as Robert drove following the frantic father's directions from the back seat, holding his feverish son. When he returned to the village hours later, the sun was already beginning to set. Word of his help had spread, and the suspicious looks had been replaced by timid waves of acknowledgement. Emily was still there, now sitting on her porch, still trying to copy letters in the dirt. "How do you spell Emily?" she asked the moment she saw him approach. Robert knelt beside her, ignoring the dust on his expensive trousers. He took the stick and wrote her name on the red earth. Emily watched every movement with absolute fascination, as if witnessing magic. Gradually, other villagers gathered around. Soon, Robert found himself seated on a simple porch, sipping coffee from a chipped cup, listening to stories about the village, how the last teacher had left years ago, how the young people moved away in search of opportunities, about abandoned dreams and postponed hopes. Emily stayed close, now joined by other children, all trying to write their names in the dirt. Each attempt, each smile when they got a letter right, each spark of understanding in their eyes felt like a tiny flame igniting something inside him. The sun had almost disappeared by the time Robert finally stood. His Land Rover, once so imposing, now seemed just another tool, like the old lady's broom that morning or Emily's stick. In his mind, numbers began lining up. Not the cold numbers of corporate spreadsheets, but calculations of possibilities, of changes, of hope. "I'll come back tomorrow," he told Emily, who watched him with those curious eyes. "And I'll bring some books, if you'd like." The smile that lit her face was more valuable than any business transaction he'd ever made. And as he drove back to his crystal tower, for the first time in decades, Robert Anderson felt he was heading in the wrong direction. He realized his true journey would begin when he returned to the village the next day. The sun hadn't risen yet when Robert parked the Land Rover in front of the abandoned school. On the passenger seat, a box of children's books he'd managed to buy at the only bookstore open during his drive back. He smiled, recalling the clerk's confused look when he asked for "all the basic books you have." The village was waking up. Smoke rose from rooftops where the first meals of the day were being prepared. A rooster crowed somewhere, and little by little, small silhouettes appeared, drawn by the visitor's return. Emily was the first to arrive, her hair still messy from sleep, but her eyes sparkling with the same curiosity as the day before. "Did you bring the books?" she asked bluntly, jumping from foot to foot. Before Robert could answer, more children approached, 10, 15, 20 small faces watching him expectantly. He carried the box onto the school's porch and sat on the worn steps. "I did," he said, opening the box. "But first, I'd like to ask you something. If you could have anything at all, what would you want?" Robert expected requests for toys, candy, maybe even smartphones or video games, things he saw his nieces and nephews demanding back in the city, but the silence that followed had a different weight. It was Lucas, an 8-year-old boy, who spoke first. "I want to learn to read like my cousin in the city. He sent me a birthday card and nobody here could read it for me." "I want to learn to write my mom's name," said a little girl, her voice almost a whisper. "She cleans houses in the city and always has to use her thumbprint on the papers." One by one, the dreams began to flow. They weren't asking for gifts or shiny gadgets. They were voices thirsty for knowledge, for opportunities, for dignity. "I want to be a teacher," declared Maria, a 10-year-old girl, "so nobody here has to grow up not knowing how to read." "I want to learn numbers," said Pedro, holding a crumpled piece of paper, "so I can help my dad not to get cheated when he sells chickens at the market." Emily Myson, who had been silent until then, approached Robert. In her hands, she clutched the same stick she'd used to write letters in the dirt the day before. "I want to read stories," she said, her small voice carrying a dream too big for her age. "All the stories in the world." Robert felt something warm and wet roll down his cheek. Tears, he realized in surprise. He hadn't cried in years, maybe decades. Around him, parents who had come closer to listen were also discreetly wiping their eyes. Mrs. Constance, the same elderly lady who watched him distrustfully the day before, stepped forward, leaning on her broom. "You know, sir," she began, her voice laden with years of wisdom, "we don't have much here, but we have dreams, and a child's dream is the richest thing there is." Robert opened the first book from the box, a basic literacy guide. The children moved closer as if he'd just revealed a treasure. In a way, he had. "So," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who wants to learn the first letter of the alphabet?" 20 tiny hands shot up at once. Emily, the quickest, was already seated beside him, stick in hand, ready to copy every letter she learned into the dirt. The next few hours were filled with children's voices, repeating letters, syllables, and simple words. Each small achievement was celebrated as a massive victory. When 6-year-old Anna managed to write her entire name in the dirt, the whole village applauded. Parents who had left for work started returning, pausing to watch this unusual scene. The man with the expensive car, now covered in red dust, sitting on the ground teaching children with what seemed like endless patience. "This is just the beginning," Robert whispered to himself, but Emily heard him. "The beginning of what?" she asked, looking up from the letter E she was trying to perfect. "The future," he replied, glancing at the sun now high in the sky. "The future you deserve." Maria, the girl who dreamed of becoming a teacher, approached with a piece of paper. She had drawn what looked like a school, but not the sad, high-abandoned building. It was a living school, with intact windows and children playing in the yard. "Is that what it will look like?" she asked, showing him the drawing. Robert held the paper carefully, like it was precious, and it was. He was holding an entire community's dream, sketched by a child's hand. "No," he answered, to everyone's surprise. "It'll be even better." The sun was beginning to set when Robert finally stood, his back aching from so many hours on the hard ground. The children protested, not wanting their impromptu class to end. "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised, putting away the books now marked with tiny red dirt fingerprints. "And the day after tomorrow, and then—" "And then?" Emily asked, her large eyes fixed on him. "Then," he smiled, "we'll build a real school, with desks, a blackboard, a library, everything you dreamed of today." The buzz of excitement that followed was like music. Parents hugged their children, kids jumped for joy, and even the skinny dog that always watched from a distance seemed to be smiling. When Robert got back into his car, he saw through the rearview mirror dozens of little hands waving. In his chest, something long dormant had awakened. He was no longer just the man from the Crystal Tower. He was a man who had found his true purpose in the hopeful voices of children who dreamed of letters and numbers. Robert parked the Land Rover in front of the village's small church, the only space large enough to gather the whole community. The afternoon sun turned the simple windows into golden stained glass, and the old bell shone as if newly polished. It was time to turn promises into concrete plans. Father Joseph, an elderly man with white hair and a gentle smile, opened the worn doors of the church. The wooden pews were quickly filled by curious villagers, their faces oscillating between hope and suspicion. The children, oblivious to formalities, sat on the floor near the altar, Emily among them. "Good afternoon," Robert began, his voice echoing off the adobe walls. For the first time in years, he felt nervous speaking publicly. Presentations to shareholders suddenly seemed easy compared to these looks that carried decades of broken promises. "Over the past few days, I've met your children and seen something extraordinary. A thirst for knowledge in their eyes. I've come to propose building a complete educational center right here in the village." A murmur spread through the church. Joseph Dake, Lucas's father, stood up. His work-roughened hands clutched a worn hat. "With all due respect, Mr. Anderson," he said firmly, "why would a wealthy man like you be interested in our village? We've seen important people come through here before, making promises during election years, then disappear." Robert felt the weight of every word. In his corporate world, distrust was addressed with contracts and bank guarantees. Here, it was different. "That's a fair question," he replied, abandoning the formal tone he used in meetings. "I'll be honest, up until last week, I was just another businessman in a tower of glass, counting money that no longer meant anything. It was your children who taught me what really matters." Emily raised her hand, interrupting without ceremony. "Are you going to build a library too? With lots of books?" Before Robert could respond, Mary Antonia, the village midwife, stood up. "And who will teach? The last teacher who came couldn't take more than 6 months here. The big city is far more attractive for someone with an education." Questions started coming from all sides, some skeptical, some hopeful. Robert realized his original plan, to present a formal proposal like he would in a corporate meeting, wouldn't work here. "May I show you something?" he asked, heading to his car. He returned with a folder containing several drawings the children had made over the past few days, including Maria's vision of the school. He spread the drawings across a small table near the altar. "I didn't come with a ready-made project because I realized I was wrong. In my arrogance as a city man, I thought I knew exactly what you needed. But look at these. Your own children have already drawn the future they dream of." Mrs. Constance, who had been observing everything in silence, approached the table. Her eyes welled up as she recognized her grandson's artwork. "The educational center will be whatever this community decides it needs," Robert continued. "Call me naive or foolish, but I've learned more about true education in 3 days with your children than in 30 years of corporate meetings." Pedro, the boy who wanted to learn math so he could help his father, stood up. "Can we have a whole room just for numbers? With an abacus and everything?" "And a huge library," Emily chimed in, her eyes shining. "And computers?" Lucas asked timidly. Robert noticed some adults shaking their heads, probably thinking these dreams were too big, but it was precisely those reactions that made him realize his own bias. Why shouldn't they have the best? "Why not?" he said aloud. "Why should these children have less than the kids in the city? I can provide resources, but I want to learn from you how best to use them." Father Joseph, who had been quietly watching until then, cleared his throat. "Perhaps," he began, his calm voice bringing order to the rising commotion, "we should hear more. Mr. Anderson, could you tell us more details?" Robert pulled up a chair and sat down, breaking the formality of his presentation. For 2 hours, he spoke with the community, hearing stories of other failed attempts, fears and hopes. Every time the children interjected, they brought new ideas and dreams that infected even the most skeptical adults. Gradually, the initial fear gave way to something else. When Mr. Anthony, the village elder, offered the wood from his old workshop to build the first desks, Robert realized the project was no longer his alone. It was emerging from their hands and dreams as well. "I don't just want to build a building," he explained, looking at the faces around him. "I want to create a space that becomes the heart of this community, with teachers from right here who understand your reality, with a library that preserves your stories. Yes, with technology, but also with the wisdom you already have." Mary Antonia, the same woman who had questioned the teacher issue, now had a different glow in her eyes. "My daughter graduated with a teaching degree," she revealed. "She went to the city because there was no work here. Maybe she'd come back if we had a real school." The meeting ended with the sun already setting, but something new had been born. Robert saw groups forming, discussing ideas, sharing dreams that had long been hidden away. Children ran among the adults, their excited voices echoing in the now empty church. Emily approached him as he was leaving. "Are you really going to make this happen?" Robert knelt to meet her gaze. "No, Emily, we are going to make it happen. All of us together." On the drive back to the city, Robert thought about how many prejudices he'd left behind in that church. He had imagined a modern, efficient educational center, but discovered that true education is born from the union of dreams and reality, of the new and the traditional, of the children's wisdom and the elders' experience. His phone rang. Thomas again, probably worried about more cancelled meetings. But for the first time in his life, Robert Anderson was absolutely certain he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he needed to do. The pile of documents on the passenger seat of the Land Rover grew by the day. Environmental permits, construction licenses, property records. Each piece of paper seemed to generate the need for 10 more. Robert spent his mornings in meetings in the city and his afternoons in the village, where real life seemed to happen. That afternoon, while waiting on another call from his lawyer, he watched a group of children playing near the abandoned school. Lucas had organized a sort of makeshift classroom, using pieces of charcoal to teach the younger kids the little he had learned from the books Robert brought. "You look worried, sir," Emily remarked, sneaking up quietly as she often did. She held an old notebook, a gift from Robert already almost filled with her attempts at writing. "It's complicated, Emily," he replied, showing her the papers. "There are people in the city who don't understand why this is so important." "Can I see?" she asked, sitting next to him on the car's hood. Robert handed her one of the less complex documents. Emily furrowed her brow, focusing on the words she still couldn't piece together completely. Her small fingers followed each line with determination. "Here," she pointed to a word. "That's school, far right? I learned it yesterday with Lucas." The pride in her voice made Robert forget his bureaucratic troubles for a moment. "That's right," he confirmed. "You're learning fast." "Everyone is," she smiled. "Even Mrs. Mary, who cleans the church, asked if we could teach her after work." His phone rang, interrupting the conversation. It was the engineer in charge of the structural project. "Mr. Anderson, we have a problem. The soil is more unstable than we thought. We'll need special foundations, which significantly increases costs and construction time." Robert felt the weight of the news, but before he could respond, he heard excitement from Lucas's classroom. Pedro, the boy who wanted to learn math, was explaining multiplication using stones lined up on the ground. "I understand," he said to the engineer. "Do whatever's necessary. Send me the revised budget by tomorrow." He ended the call and walked over to the group. Pedro had created a multiplication system using different colored stones to represent tens and units. It was intuitive, brilliant in its simplicity. "How did you come up with this, Pedro?" Robert asked, impressed. The boy shrugged, shy. "It's how I count the chickens with my dad. It's easier not to make mistakes." In that moment, Robert realized there was more wisdom in that dusty courtyard than in many conference rooms he had known. Each child carried a unique potential, shaped by necessity and creativity. Maria, the girl who dreamed of being a teacher, had created a reading corner under a tree, where she told made-up stories to the younger kids, using the few words she could read to invent entire worlds of imagination. John Tasson, who barely spoke in the first improvised lessons, revealed himself to be a gifted artist, drawing detailed maps of the village on the old school walls, marking where each family lived and which plants grew in each yard. Afternoons passed in a mix of discoveries and challenges. While Robert wrestled with bureaucracy in the mornings, the children built their own educational system, driven by an insatiable hunger for knowledge. One day, after another frustrating meeting at City Hall, Robert arrived in the village to find something different. The children had organized a performance. "It's a surprise," Emily announced, pulling him by the hand to the front of the school. There, each child showed what they had learned in the past weeks. Lucas recited the entire alphabet without missing a letter. Pedro solved multiplication problems with his colored stones, earning enthusiastic applause when he did a complex one in his head. Maria told a story she had invented about a village that sprouted wings once it learned to read. John Cheers, the shy artist, had drawn a blueprint of the new educational center, not in a technical sense, but as the kids imagined it. Full of colors, large windows for sunlight, and a library bigger than the entire village. "We can't wait any longer," Maria explained with the seriousness of a school principal. "So we made our own school, for now." Robert felt tears again, but this time he didn't try to hide them. This was proof that no bureaucracy or technical setback could stop the transformative power of education when it found fertile ground. That night, instead of driving back to the city, he stayed in the village. Sitting on Mrs. Constance's porch, she had insisted on serving him dinner, he started rethinking his strategy. He'd been going about the problem the wrong way, he realized. He was trying to force an urban project into a rural setting, instead of letting the community itself show the way. "Children have a lot to teach us," Mrs. Constance commented, as if reading his thoughts. "All we have to do is learn to listen." The next day, Robert cancelled all meetings with architects and consultants in the city. Instead, he gathered the children and adults of the village for a full day of collective planning. Pedro brought his stones to help with the calculations. John sketched every suggestion on the old school walls. Maria organized ideas into stories everyone could understand. Emily, with her increasingly filled notebook, wrote down each decision in her own way. The project that emerged was unlike anything Robert had done before. It wasn't grand like he had initially planned, but it was real, organic, born from the red earth and the children's dreams. "You know what I learned," he said to Emily at the end of the day, as they watched the sunset together. "Sometimes the biggest obstacles are the ones we create in our own minds." Emily smiled. a smile that could brighten even the hardest days. And you know what I learned? That if you really want something, even learning to read becomes easy. Robert looked at the stack of documents in his car with new eyes. They were no longer barriers, just stepping stones. And with the example of those children, who turned stones into math lessons and old walls into art canvases, no challenge seemed too great to overcome. Dawn broke as Robert arrived at the village that Saturday morning. To his surprise, the front of the abandoned school was bustling. Children and adults carried brooms, buckets, and cloths, while Mr. Anthony directed the distribution of basic tools from his old woodworking shop. "Morning, Mr. Robert," Emily called, her braids swinging with excitement. "Today is clean-up day." It was Lucas's idea. Lucas, determinedly sweeping the school's entrance, looked up with pride. "If we're going to have classes here until the new school is ready, we need to make it look nice." The initiative had started with the kids, but soon involved the entire community. Mrs. Mary brought coffee and cookies for the volunteers. Mr. Joseph, who had always been the most skeptical, showed up with his toolbox to repair the broken windows. "My son Pedro won't stop talking about these classes," he told Robert as he measured one window for fixing. "Yesterday, he showed me a new way to do math I'd never seen. Said he came up with it himself." Robert watched in amazement as the work organized itself naturally. Maria, the aspiring teacher, divided the children into specialized team, as she called them. There was a cleaning crew, a decorating crew, and even a documentation team, led by John, who sketched every step of the process on walls that would be painted later. "You need to see this," Emily said, pulling his hand. She led him behind the school, where a group of older kids had started a vegetable garden. Pedro measured the space using his math, and Mrs. Constance is teaching us about plants. In the middle of the plot, Mrs. Constance was kneeling in the dirt, showing the children how to prepare the soil. Her wrinkled hands moved with the wisdom of decades of farming, while the kids asked endless questions about every detail. "This garden will be special," Maria explained, joining them with her notebook. "We'll learn science by growing vegetables for the cafeteria. It was my mom's idea." Maria's mother, who had once resisted the project, was now one of its biggest enthusiasts. Robert saw her organizing other women to plan how to restore the old school kitchen. By midday, the transformation was visible. The broken windows were fixed, the interior walls had been cleaned, and the courtyard, once overgrown, was cleared for the garden. But more impressive than the physical changes was the energy radiating from the people. "Mr. Robert," Pedro called, approaching with his notebook of calculations. "I did some math here. If every family donates a little each month, we can buy books for the library a bit at a time." Robert took the notebook, admiring the meticulous calculations done in the boy's still uneven handwriting. It wasn't just numbers. It was a full plan of action, with cost estimates and a simple but effective timeline. "And that's not all," Lucas said, joining the conversation. "We have an idea for next week. Want to see?" The children led him to the room they had chosen as the future library. On the freshly cleaned walls, John had drawn a huge mural, "First Santa Clara Village Talent Fair." "We're going to show everyone what we've learned," Maria said with shining eyes. "There'll be reading presentations, an exhibit of John's drawings, a demonstration of Pedro's math, and lots of music," Emily added. "Mr. Anthony is going to teach us old village songs." Word of the fair spread quickly. Soon other residents offered to participate. Mr. Manuel, who rarely spoke, revealed he could carve wood and offered to give workshops for the kids. Mrs. Teresa, an expert at embroidery, suggested teaching any interested boys or girls. Robert realized something extraordinary was happening. What began as an educational center was turning into a cultural revival and community gathering, all powered by the children's indefatigable enthusiasm. The following week was a whirlwind of preparations. The kids practiced their presentations with touching seriousness. Pedro turned his colored stones into a math teaching system that even adults could grasp. John covered an entire wall with a mural depicting the village's history in vibrant colors. On Friday, the day before the fair, Robert arrived early and found Emily alone at the school, practicing her reading. "Nervous about tomorrow?" he asked, sitting next to her. "A little," she admitted. But Maria said being nervous is good. It means we care. The simple wisdom of that child caught him off guard, as it often did. You know, Emily, when I first started this project, I thought I was here to teach you. But each day, I realize you're the ones teaching me. Emily smiled, that radiant smile that could light up any room. It's because we're doing this together, right? Everyone teaching everyone. On Saturday, the day of the fair, the village woke up in celebration. The schoolyard had transformed into an open-air exhibition space. Colorful flags made by the children from scrap paper fluttered in the wind. The smell of cornbread and fresh coffee filled the air. The presentations began at 9. Lucas opened the event by reading a text he had written about the importance of education. His hands trembled holding the paper, but his voice remained steady. Pedro demonstrated his math method, drawing enthusiastic applause when he solved a complex multiplication in his head. Maria led a children's choir singing traditional songs from the region, rediscovered by talking to the village elders. John unveiled his mural, explaining every detail of the story he had illustrated in bold colors. The biggest surprise came when Emily took the makeshift stage. In a clear voice, she read a short text she had written herself. Our village is learning that dreams have no size. Every letter we learn is one step closer to the sky. Not a single eye was dry in the audience. Robert saw parents hugging their kids with pride, neighbors excitedly discussing future plans, and elders sharing stories with children crowding around them, hungry for knowledge. The event ran into the afternoon, naturally turning into a community celebration. The craft workshops turned into lively chats about local history. The math demonstration evolved into a discussion on how to improve the village's product sales. At sunset, while helping organize the space, Robert found a folded note on his car seat. It was one of John's drawings, showing all the village children holding hands in a circle around the school. In the center, written carefully by Emily, were the words, "Thank you for believing in us." That night, driving back to the city, Robert realized the real project wasn't just the building being constructed, or even the future modern installations. The real project was the transformative energy the children had awakened in the entire community. His phone rang, Thomas no doubt with another urgent corporate matter. But for the first time, corporate issues seemed trivial compared to what was happening in that village where, guided by the children's wisdom, people were rediscovering their own strength. The sound of machinery broke the usual morning silence in the village. Robert watched the first excavator preparing the ground where the new educational center would rise when he felt a tug on his shirt. It was Emily, notebook tucked under her arm. "Can I help too?" she asked, eyes fixed on the markings the engineers had laid out. "It's dangerous to get too close to the machinery," Robert began to explain, but quickly realized that wasn't what she meant. "No, silly," she laughed. "Help plan the school. John's already done a bunch of sketches of what it could look like inside." As if on cue, John showed up carrying his drawings. They weren't simple childish doodles. They were practical ideas. A library with cushions by the windows for reading, a circular garden where outdoor lessons could be held, a large mural at the entrance where each new student could leave their mark. "You two thought of all this by yourselves?" Robert asked, impressed. "We had a meeting," Maria explained, joining them. "Everyone said what they wanted in the new school. Even Mrs. Constance gave us ideas." The engineers, initially skeptical about the children's involvement, soon found themselves surrounded by enthusiastic little consultants. Pedro surprised everyone when he pointed out a spacing flaw in the courtyard calculations. Once again, his colored stones proved infallible. The following week saw constant transformation. The foundation was laid, and each child insisted on placing something special in the concrete, a pebble, a coin, a small object symbolizing their dream. "It's so the school knows it's already ours, even before it's finished," Emily explained, as she placed her first, now well-used reading booklet in a small box before submerging it in the fresh concrete. Robert, used to supervising massive projects with professional detachment, found himself increasingly involved in the smallest details. When Lucas suggested the library have a special section for books written by the students themselves, Robert spent an entire night redesigning the layout to include the idea. One day, Arriving earlier than usual, he found Maria alone, sitting on the steps of the construction site, writing in her notebook. "What are you writing?" he asked, sitting next to her. "The story of our school," she said without looking up from the page. "From the day you got here until now, so we never forget how it all began." Robert felt a lump in his throat. Back in his New York penthouse, he had awards and recognition for major projects, but none meant as much as that simple notebook where a young girl was documenting a true story of transformation. The walls began to rise, and with them grew something else in the community. Neighbors who once barely spoke now met to discuss how they could contribute. Mr. Anthony assembled a team to build the first desks. Mrs. Teresa started making curtains from donated scraps of fabric. "You know what's really neat?" Pedro asked one day while measuring his future math classroom with careful steps. "Everyone's learning together now. My dad never used a tape measure before, and now he even knows how to draw a blueprint." The children turned the construction site into an extension of their makeshift classroom. John began teaching other boys to draw on the still unfinished walls. Lucas organized a weekly construction newsletter, meticulously recording each development as if he were a historian. A particularly touching moment came when it was time to raise the roof. It was a scorching day and workers sweated under the relentless sun. Suddenly, Emily appeared, leading a group of children carrying pitchers of fresh lemonade. "We want to help too," she declared with a child's earnest seriousness. "We made lemonade for everyone." Robert watched as calloused workers accepted cups of lemonade from tiny hands, exchanging smiles, the distance between different worlds dissolving in the heat of the day. He realized he was witnessing much more than a building going up. He was seeing a community being built. That night, alone in his city office, Robert flipped through the photos on his phone. No longer were they images of corporate meetings or social events. They were children's smiles, walls going up, little hands leaving marks on the future. He recalled how he once measured success in graphs and numbers. Now, his most important indicator was Emily's eyes lighting up when she read a new word, or Pedro's proud stance as he taught math to adults who had never finished school. The construction progressed at a steady pace, but the real work was happening in small daily moments, like when Maria gathered everyone to bury a time capsule in the library's foundation, containing letters the children wrote for future students. "Dear friend from the future," Emily had written in her still uneven handwriting, "this school was built with love. Every brick holds a dream inside. Please take good care of it for us." Robert kept a copy of that letter in his briefcase. On tough days, when the bureaucracy felt endless or technical problems piled up, he'd read those simple words and find the strength to push on. One afternoon, while overseeing the installation of windows, Robert overheard two children playing nearby. "When I grow up," said one, "I want to build schools in other places too." "Like Mr. Robert?" asked the other. "No," the first one replied after thinking, "I want to do it differently. I want to start by teaching first, like Maria does. Then the school will come naturally." That innocent conversation hit Robert like a revelation. He realized he had begun everything backwards, focusing on structure, resources, and logistics. It was the children who showed him the true foundation of education, dreams, and the will to learn and teach. That evening, before heading back to the city, Robert paused to watch the sunset bathe the unfinished educational center in gold. Emily, with her knack for appearing in meaningful moments, joined him silently. "Mr. Robert," she said after a moment, "do you think that once the school is done, it'll be the end of the story?" He smiled, recognizing the wisdom behind that seemingly simple question. "No, Emily. I think it'll just be the start of many stories." "Good," she replied, taking his hand as naturally as ever, "because I still have a lot to learn, and to teach too." Robert gently squeezed that small hand, thinking of how his life had changed since arriving in this village. He had come to build an educational center, but found the greatest lessons weren't in any book or concrete wall. They were in children's smiles, in the simple wisdom of their questions, in the purity of their dreams. The new center hadn't even completed its first month of operation when the official cars started rolling into the village. Robert watched from the library window, where he was helping Emily with her reading, as men in suits crossed the courtyard, taking photos and notes. "Who are they?" Emily asked, eyes wide with apprehension. Before Robert could respond, the library door opened. Mayor August Sanders stepped in, followed by two aides and a man Robert immediately recognized, Charles Miller, one of the biggest real estate developers in the region. "Impressive work, Anderson," the mayor remarked, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. "I never thought we'd see something like this in a place like this." Emily instinctively clutched the book to her chest, as if protecting it. Robert placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "The village has a lot of potential," he replied diplomatically. "The children just needed a chance." "Ah, yes, children," Charles Miller interjected, his calculating gaze sweeping the room. "But don't you think they deserve more? Real development, progress." A week later, posters began to appear around the village. "Grand Santa Clara Mall, the future is here." The flyers featured computer-generated images of a massive shopping complex occupying almost the entire village area. "Are they going to knock down our houses?" Pedro asked during math class, his voice trembling slightly. "My dad said they're offering money for people to leave." Robert noticed the children were no longer able to focus on lessons. John, who used to fill the walls with colorful drawings, now only produced dark, somber sketches. Maria stopped telling her animated stories during break. One afternoon, he found Emily alone in the garden they had planted. She was yanking out weeds with unnecessary force, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. "They said the mall will be built right here," she said without looking at him. "The lady from the county said they're putting a food court where we planted our tomatoes." Robert sat down beside her on the dirt. "Emily, tell me, what do you think of this mall?" "Everyone says it's progress." She finally looked at him. "They say it'll bring jobs, that the village will get modern. But you know what I think, Mr. Robert? That progress shouldn't hurt this much." Her words struck Robert like a blow. In his corporate past, how many times had he used the argument of progress to justify decisions that affected entire communities? That night, instead of returning to the city, he stayed again in the village. Sitting on Mrs. Constance's porch, he heard stories of other progress promises that had passed through, leaving more destruction than benefits. "The land here is good," Mr. Anthony remarked, joining the conversation. "Too good to be covered in concrete and glass." Robert began making phone calls. His years in the corporate world had taught him to read between the lines of big projects. Something about this mall project didn't add up. Why build such a huge complex in such a remote area? The answers came slowly. Public documents revealed far bigger plans than just a mall. The village area was only the beginning. There were plans for luxury condos, hotels, a whole tourist complex that would completely transform the region. "What about the people who already live here?" Lucas asked during an impromptu meeting at the school. "Where do we go?" "The mayor said they'd build a housing project on the other side of the city," Maria relayed sadly. "Far from everything. Far from our school." The children organized their own form of resistance. John covered the village walls with drawings that told the community's story. Pedro used his math skills to calculate how many families would be affected, how much it would really cost for each to start over somewhere else. "Look at this, Mr. Robert," Emily said one afternoon, showing him a text she'd written in her now much steadier handwriting. It was a letter addressed to the mayor. "Dear Mr. Mayor, have you ever tried to pull a tree out of the ground and plant it somewhere else? Sometimes it dies, you know, because its roots suffer a lot. We're just like those trees. Our roots are here. Please don't kill our village." Robert saved a copy of that letter along with other documents he was gathering. His investigations revealed more and more irregularities, ignored environmental assessments, rushed eviction processes, indemnity values way below fair market prices. One tense morning, he found the children gathered around a model of the village they had built. They had added miniature shopping mall structures, showing how they would swallow up their houses, their school, the church, everything they knew. "You know what's saddest, Mr. Robert?" Maria commented, adjusting a paper tree representing the old mango tree where they liked to play. "They say it's for us to have a better life. But we were just starting to have a better life already." Robert looked at those children who, in just a few months, had learned far more than just reading and writing. They had learned about community, about belonging, about fighting for what they believed in. He couldn't let all that be destroyed in the name of a progress that only benefited a few. "Promise me something," Emily asked as he was leaving that night. "Promise you won't let them tear down our school." Robert knelt to meet her gaze. In Emily's eyes, he saw not just the fear of losing the school, but also a hope that there was still justice in the world. "I promise," he said, feeling the real weight of a promise for the first time. "But I'll need your help." Driving back to the city, Robert began to formulate a plan. It wouldn't be easy. He was up against people he knew well, who played the same game he once had. But now he had something they didn't: the power of pure dreams and the determination of children who discovered the power of knowledge. In his briefcase, alongside the incriminating documents he was collecting, Emily's letter to the mayor seemed to shine with a simple yet powerful truth. Real progress, he now understood, wasn't measured in square footage or bank statements. Real progress was in a child's eyes discovering a new world through books, in tiny hands planting seeds of hope in a community garden, in the smiles that lit an improvised classroom. And that was progress worth fighting for. The brown envelope on Robert's desk felt like it weighed a ton. Inside was the city's offer, 3 times the amount invested in the educational center if he would voluntarily walk away from the project. The mayor had been clear. It was a one-time deal with a 48-hour deadline. His phone rang for the 5th time that morning. Thomas, his assistant, reminding him about a vital board meeting. But Robert barely listened. His thoughts were back in the village, where Maria was likely teaching her first class as an assistant monitor. He had promised to stop by today to watch the reading presentations for the beginner class. Emily had practiced her part for weeks, determined to show she could read an entire text on her own. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Charles Miller entered without waiting for an invitation, wearing a polished commercial smile. "Anderson, be reasonable," he began, sitting down uninvited. "Those kids can study anywhere. The mall will bring jobs, development. Think bigger." Robert looked out the window of his city office, remembering when he thought exactly like that: development at any cost, progress measured in concrete square feet. "I have to go," he said abruptly, standing up. "I have an appointment in the village." "Still that story," Charles scoffed humorlessly. "You have 24 hours, Anderson. After that, things might get complicated." In the village, tension was palpable. Mall posters had multiplied, now promising preferential employment for local residents. Some families had already accepted the relocation offer, their homes marked with red paint for demolition. But inside the educational center, a different reality was taking shape. Robert arrived in time to see Maria confidently leading her literacy group. In 3 months, she had gone from student to teaching assistant, proving that when knowledge is shared, it multiplies. "Mr. Robert," Emily ran up to him, clutching a book to her chest. "I finished reading it all by myself yesterday. Want to see?" Before he could answer, Pedro appeared carrying a chart he'd made. "Look, I did the math. 80% of the class can now read simple words, and 60% are writing short texts." The pride in his voice was contagious. Robert took the chart, admiring the precision of the calculations. In just a few months, these kids had progressed more than some schools managed in a whole year. The reading presentations were moving. One by one, students showed off their progress. Lucas, who barely knew his letters 3 months earlier, read a text on environmental preservation that he had written himself. John illustrated each classmate's reading with sketches that perfectly captured the essence of their stories. Emily was the last to present. With a clear, confident voice, she read a story about a village where children saved their homes by learning together. Robert felt his chest tighten. Even so young, she understood exactly what was at stake. After the presentation, he found Mrs. Constance in the courtyard, watching the children play. "The mayor offered you money too, didn't he?" she asked bluntly. "Same as he offered the families." Robert nodded, surprised by her perceptiveness. "You know," she continued, "money is like water. It can make things grow, or it can drown them. The question is, what do we want to make grow?" That night, driving back to the city, Robert stopped midway. The sun was setting over the village, painting the sky with colors no shopping mall could replicate. The envelope from City Hall was still in his glove compartment, weighing like a choice between 2 worlds. His phone beeped again. A voicemail from Emily. Mr. Robert, Ms. Maria helped me record this. I just wanted to tell you I finished reading my first whole book alone today. The librarian said I can borrow more now. There are so many pretty books there. We can't lose this, right? The simplicity of her words carried more truth than all the spreadsheets and projections about them all. Robert opened the envelope for the first time that day. The numbers were staggering, enough to secure him financially for multiple lifetimes. Yet all he could see were the kids' eyes lighting up as they discovered new worlds through reading. Pedro's pride in explaining math to adults, Maria's determination to become a teacher, and John's drawings telling the story of his community. He picked up his phone and typed a short message to Charles Miller. The answer is no. It will always be no. Seconds later, the reply arrived. You'll regret this, Anderson. Maybe that was true. The fight ahead wouldn't be easy, and he was siding with the underdogs. But watching the sun set over the village, Robert Anderson smiled. For the first time in his life, he was absolutely certain he was on the right side of history. Tomorrow, he'd face the consequences of his choice. But today, somewhere in that village, a little girl was reading her first book by herself. And that, he realized, was worth more than all the malls in the world. It was Maria who had the idea first. During a writing class, she suddenly stood up, eyes shining with determination. What if we showed everyone what's happening here? She suggested, looking around at her classmates. Not just the parents, but the whole town. Her suggestion quickly turned into action. The children organized what they called the Living Knowledge Fair. Each student would demonstrate not just what they'd learned, but how that learning was changing their lives. Robert watched in awe as the educational center buzzed with preparations. Pedro transformed his math lessons into charts showing the community's progress. Look, he explained to anyone who would listen, this is how many people could read before, and this is how many can read now. John, with his increasingly refined art, led the creation of a massive mural at the center's entrance. Every family gets to leave their mark, he said, distributing brushes and paint. So everyone knows who this school belongs to, hundreds of owners. Emily surprised everyone by proposing a storytelling session. We can share the village's tales, she suggested, not just reading, but showing that every family here has a story worth telling. News of the fair spread throughout the region. Robert used his connections to ensure the local media would attend, but the children themselves wrote the invitations, including a special one for the mayor and his staff. On the morning of the event, the village awoke transformed. Colorful banners, made by the students from repurposed paper, stretched across the streets. The smell of coffee and homemade pastries filled the air as families prepared to welcome visitors. Mr. Robert, Emily called, grabbing his hand as usual, come see what we've got ready. In the center's courtyard, each class had set up a display. The beginner literacy group showcased their progress with a timeline of writing samples, from their first scribbles to full paragraphs. Maria led a group performing skits based on local stories. We're showing that education isn't just reading and writing, she explained with the poise of an experienced teacher. It's knowing who we are. The first visitors began to arrive, including reporters and city officials. Robert noticed the exact moment the mayor's skeptical expression began to shift as he watched Pedro explain advanced mathematical concepts using his unique teaching methods. It's impressive what these children can do when given the opportunity, the mayor remarked, a faint smile forming at the corner of his lips. That kid, commented one of the council members, visibly impressed, is teaching trigonometry with stones and string. Mrs. Constance, passing by with a tray of coffee, smiled. And you should see him teaching the adults after the harvest. Nobody here gets cheated on market day anymore. The most touching moment came during the storytelling session. Entire families took turns sharing their memories, now written down by their own children in simple yet powerful texts. Emily read the story of how her grandmother arrived in the village decades ago, dreaming of a better life for her descendants. And now, she finished in her clear voice, that dream is coming true. Not in the way Grandma imagined, with tall buildings or fancy stores, but in the right way, by learning how to write our own story. Robert, seen watching everything quietly, felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Charles Miller, the man behind the mall project. "Impressive," he admitted, sounding genuinely moved. "But even so, Anderson, progress is inevitable. This region needs to develop." "This is progress," Robert replied, indicating an elderly woman who was learning to write her name with a child's help. "It's just a progress you can't measure in square footage or market value." That afternoon, once fewer visitors were around, Robert gathered the community to make an important announcement. Using his corporate experience, he had discovered that the land on which the educational center stood held a historical title, protecting it from condemnation. "But that's not all," he continued, addressing the attentive audience. "I've managed to register the center as a cultural and educational institution of public interest. This means that any development project in the region must preserve and integrate this space." Applause and tears of joy followed. Children ran to hug their parents, teachers, and each other. In the midst of the celebration, Emily approached Robert. "We did it, didn't we?" she asked, her eyes shining. "We did more than just save a school," he replied, surveying the scene around him. "We showed that real progress begins with education and unity." That night, as the community celebrated with music and shared meals, Robert realized his life had changed completely. The man who once measured success in numbers and profits now saw it in smiles, in daily small victories, in lives transformed by the power of knowledge. The educational center wouldn't just survive, it would become a model of how development and cultural preservation could work hand in hand. And it all began with the pure, determined vision of children who refused to give up on their dreams. Robert's office was unrecognizable. Papers covered every available surface, connected by red strings forming a complex web of information. 3 months of meticulous investigation finally revealed the whole picture behind the mall project. "It's much worse than we thought," he explained to Thomas, who observed the evidence with growing concern. "The mall is only the first phase. They're planning an entire luxury condo complex. And guess what? The shell companies that bought the surrounding plots all belong to the same group." His phone buzzed. A message from Emily. "Mr. Robert, come see. We've got something special ready for the public hearing." At the educational center, he found the children preparing a different kind of exhibition. John had created a series of panels telling the village's story from the children's perspective, before and after the new center. "Here," Maria explained, pointing to one of the panels, "is how our lives have changed." Pedro drew these graphs showing how many people have learned to read, how many adults came back to study. The display filled the entire central courtyard. In one corner, a group of children practiced performances for the public hearing scheduled in 2 days. Lucas, now a fluent reader, rehearsed his speech with unwavering determination. "Mr. Mayor," he repeated, adjusting the small makeshift badge he'd created, "have you ever thought that progress isn't just about building new things, but taking care of what already exists?" Robert watched it all with a mix of pride and apprehension. In his briefcase, he carried documents that could blow open the entire mall scheme, but he feared the repercussions for the community. Tension rose when 3 official cars stopped at the center's entrance. Mayor August Sanders got out first, followed by Charles Miller and other business people. Their faces hardened at the sight of the exhibit. "What sort of circus is this, Anderson?" the mayor snapped, pointing at the panels. "Manipulating these kids for your political games." Emily, who stood nearby, stepped forward. "Nobody's being manipulated," she said firmly, though her voice was small. "We're just showing our truth." The silence that followed was deafening. Charles Miller leaned toward Robert and spoke quietly. "Last chance, Anderson. We have a private meeting before the hearing. Show up, and we can do this the easy way." After they left, the community gathered in the library. Robert laid out everything he had discovered: the shell companies, the misappropriation of public funds, the sheer scope of the plan to erase the entire village. "But we won't give up," Maria declared, surprising everyone with her determination. "We'll show at the hearing that this school isn't just a building. It's the heart of our community." The next 48 hours were intense. While Robert organized the evidence with his legal team, the children mobilized the entire village. Pedro created a math presentation demonstrating the true economic impact of the educational center. John translated complex data into infographics anyone could understand. On the morning of the hearing, the village looked different. Homemade banners and posters made by the children hung from every house and pole. Entire families, many for the first time, prepared to head to City Hall. "Mr. Robert," Emily called before they boarded the bus the community had rented. "Remember when you first came here, and we didn't know how to read, but we knew how to dream. Now we know both." The city council chamber had never been so packed. On one side, business people and politicians in their expensive suits. On the other, a whole community led by its children. Robert noticed how restless the mayor looked, especially when the local press arrived. The hearing opened with the official presentations for the mall project. Polished slides showed astonishing economic projections, promises of jobs and development. Then it was the community's turn. Lucas spoke first, his once small voice growing stronger with each sentence. Maria presented factual data about the educational center's impact. John projected his drawings of the village before and after the school, prompting audible gasps from the audience. When it was finally his turn, Robert rose slowly. He looked at the children and their hopeful faces, then at the group of business people. He held a folder containing all the evidence of corruption. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I came prepared to expose a corruption scheme involving many influential people. But after listening to these children, I realize they've shown something much more powerful, the simple truth that real progress starts with education." One by one, he presented the positive statistics on the educational center: literacy rates, adult participation in studies, local economic growth. The children backed up each point with their personal stories, turning impersonal figures into real-life outcomes. The turning point came when Emily, the smallest of them all, walked up to the podium clutching her first writing notebook. "This notebook," she said, her voice echoing across the room, "has the first word I ever wrote by myself. It was hope. If you destroy our school, you won't just tear down a building. You'll destroy the hope of a lot of people." The silence that followed was broken by spontaneous applause. Robert watched the exact moment the mayor realized he had lost the fight, not because of the threat of corruption charges, but because of the irrefutable power of truth spoken by a child. That evening, while the community celebrated the official suspension of the mall project, Robert stood watching children play in the school courtyard. The truth that had emerged wasn't just about corruption and greed. It was about the transformative power of education and the unbeatable strength of a community united by its children. The sun rose differently over the village the next morning. The last of the celebration banners still hung, silent witnesses to the victory that seemed to have changed everything. The educational center wouldn't just survive, it had become a symbol of resilience and community solidarity. Robert parked his Land Rover in its usual spot, watching the children arriving for class. Pedro proudly carried his box of teaching materials, likely planning more of his innovative math lessons. Maria moved among the younger ones, already naturally taking on her role as a future teacher. "Mr. Robert!" Emily ran over, hugging his legs like she did every morning. "I'm showing my first book to the class today." He smiled, but his expression didn't quite reach his eyes. The email he'd received the night before weighed on his mind like lead. Gregory Matthews, the CEO of one of the largest international education corporations, had watched the hearing online. Impressed with how Robert handled the situation, he was offering a proposition that, at another time, would have been a dream come true. The meeting would be at Robert's city office in a few hours. He tried to focus on Emily's presentation. She read with ever-increasing skill, but her words melded with snippets from the email. International expansion, Singapore headquarters, 5-year contract, unique opportunity. "You didn't like the story?" Emily asked, noticing his distraction. "Of course I did," he answered quickly, feeling a pang of guilt. "You're reading better every day." In the teacher's room, he found Maria organizing materials for her next supervised lesson. Her eyes gleamed as she explained the teaching plan she had developed. "I discovered a way to use village stories to teach geography," she said excitedly. "John's doing the maps, and every student will research their grandparents' stories about how the region used to be. Mr. Robert, could you help us with—" "Sure," he interrupted, glancing at his watch. "But I need to go now. I have an important meeting in the city." On the drive, the landscape that once fascinated him, the shift from red dirt to asphalt, open fields giving way to skyscrapers, now seemed to divide not just two places, but two possible lives. Gregory Matthews was exactly as his business magazine photos suggested, imposing, articulate, radiating an air of turning everything he touched to gold. "Robert," he began, pouring himself some imported coffee, "what you did in that village is extraordinary, but think bigger. Our corporation is expanding throughout Asia. We need someone with your vision, your ability to connect education and development." The numbers in the subsequent presentation were staggering. The salary alone far surpassed anything Robert had earned in his old corporate life. The project involved setting up educational centers in underprivileged communities all over Asia. "It's your chance to replicate your success on a global scale," Gregory went on. "Thousands of Emilys could benefit. But we need you in Singapore, immediately." Back at the village that afternoon, Robert found a different kind of bustle at the center. The children had organized a surprise presentation, celebrating their victory at the public hearing. John had painted a new mural, the entire community holding hands around the school. Pedro presented statistics on how the village had advanced since the center opened. Lucas read an essay about how his family, once planning to leave, now felt proud to stay. "And the best part, Mr. Robert," Maria chimed in during the celebration, "3 other nearby villages want to start projects like ours. We can help them, right?" Robert's heart clenched. Gregory's proposal meant helping not just a few villages, but entire communities in several countries. It was a chance to turn this local project into a global movement. But why did the thought of leaving hurt so much? Emily later found him in the library, where he sat absent-mindedly among the shelves he had helped fill. "You're different today," she said, showing the quiet insight that always surprised him. "Is something sad going on?" "No, Emily. I'm just thinking about some tough decisions. When I have to decide something hard," she replied, grabbing a book from the shelf, "I remember what Maria taught me. We have to listen to our heart, because it always knows the way home." Robert spent the rest of the afternoon simply watching life at the educational center. He saw Mrs. Constance teaching the children about medicinal plants in the community garden. He saw Mr. Anthony guiding a group of teenagers in the makeshift woodworking shop, making new furniture for the expanded reading room. In every corner, he recognized little miracles he had helped create. Not just lessons and books, but a profound transformation in how these people saw themselves and their future. His phone rang repeatedly, Gregory Matthews wanting an answer. The opportunity was once in a lifetime, he emphasized. The deadline was in 48 hours. That evening, in his city penthouse, Robert stared at the contract for a fortune beyond his wildest dreams. On his desk lay a simple drawing Emily had made that morning, she and her classmates holding hands with him, under the words, "Our School Family." The decision he had to make wasn't just about 2 jobs, or even 2 places. It was a choice between 2 types of impact, a fast global expansion, or a deep-rooted growth of a single community. His phone buzzed again, Gregory's final reminder. "Think carefully, Robert. Opportunities like this don't come twice." But gazing at the city lights, Robert realized that perhaps the real once-in-a-lifetime chance had already arrived, the day he decided to stop his car in that remote village and listen to a little girl who wanted to learn to read. Robert woke before the alarm, as he had for days. Gregory Matthews's contract remained on his desk, untouched. 24 hours left to decide. Dozens of messages from Thomas about the Singapore deal went unanswered on his phone. He drove to the village earlier than usual, stopping in the exact spot where he had parked on his first visit months ago. The memory flooded back. Emily drawing letters in the dirt, her eyes lighting up at the discovery that he could read. "Will you teach me?" she had asked, with that unique mix of hope and resolve. The educational center was getting its finishing touches. A team painted the facade in the colors chosen by the children, blue like the sky, yellow like the sun, as Maria insisted. At the entrance, John oversaw the installation of a collective mural he had drawn. "Good morning, Mr. Robert," Father Joseph greeted, approaching with his usual cup of coffee. "You're here bright and early today." Robert nodded, accepting the coffee. He studied the priest for a moment, thinking that if anyone understood this community deeply, it was him. "Father," he began hesitantly, "have you ever wondered if you're doing enough, if you could do more somewhere else?" The older man smiled kindly. "You know, I've received offers to serve in bigger parishes in the capital, but I've learned that sometimes doing a lot for a few is better than doing little for many." Before Robert could respond, he heard Pedro's excited voice calling him. The boy ran over, carrying pages covered in calculations. "Mr. Robert, I did the math on the center's impact. Check this out. If each student teaches 2 more people, in 5 years the whole region will be literate." The boy's enthusiasm took Robert back to another moment. Pedro using colored stones to teach math, inventing his own teaching method born from need and love of learning. Maria appeared, carrying a folder full of plans. "We're organizing a surprise for you," she revealed excitedly. "But it won't be ready till the grand opening." The grand opening. It was scheduled for 2 weeks later, way beyond the deadline for the Singapore proposal. Robert felt the weight of his decision pressing down again. He spent the morning observing lessons, each moment surfacing more memories. There was Lucas, now helping younger kids with reading in the same spot where he himself had struggled with the alphabet months earlier. In the garden, Mrs. Constance demonstrated how to merge traditional knowledge with formal education. During the break, he found Emily under the mango tree, writing in her notebook. "What are you working on?" he asked, sitting beside her. "A story about our school," she replied, not looking up. "About how a city man discovered that happiness doesn't live in glass towers." Robert felt his heart tighten. How could this child, without even knowing it, pinpoint his dilemma so exactly? That afternoon, he was visited by Joseph, Lucas's father, who now headed the library expansion project. "You know, Mr. Robert," Joseph said as they discussed the new bookshelves, "before I was ashamed that I couldn't read very well. Now I learn something new every day from my own son. How can you put a price on that?" Joseph's words echoed in Robert's mind when Gregory Matthews called that evening. "Robert, we need your answer by tomorrow," he said firmly but politely. "Think about the difference we can make. Thousands of centers like yours in dozens of countries. It's your chance to make history." After hanging up, Robert walked into the future main library. The shelves were still empty, waiting for the books due to arrive the following week. John had painted a huge tree on the wall, its branches stretching across the ceiling. On each leaf, there was space to write a student's name. "It's the tree of knowledge," John explained, appearing quietly at his side. "Each person who learns something new here will leave their mark." Robert recalled the first time he saw the boys' drawings, simple sketches that blossomed into art when encouraged and given the chance. How many such talents were waiting in other villages, other countries? At the end of the day, he found Maria organizing a group of kids in the auditorium. They quickly hid their papers when they saw him. "It's top secret," Maria declared proudly. "You'll only see it on opening day." Driving back to the city, Robert replayed every conversation in his mind. The international contract promised staggering numbers, a chance to replicate this success on a global scale. But he couldn't forget Father Joseph's words. Sometimes doing a lot for a few is better than doing little for many. At home in his penthouse, he opened his laptop to draft his response to Gregory Matthews. A photo appeared on the screen, one he'd taken weeks ago of all the children, beaming around the first tree they had planted in the garden. "Roots have to go deep," Mrs. Constance had said that day, "if the tree is to grow strong and bear good fruit." His phone rang one last time. Emily. "Mr. Robert," she sounded sleepy, "I just wanted to say good night. And also that the surprise we're planning is going to be the prettiest thing in the world. You'll cry." After the call, Robert stared at the contract on his desk for a long time. On one wall hung a painting he had bought at a famous auction, an award-winning piece. Right next to it, taped to the wall, was Emily's drawing with her very first attempt at writing the word friend. The decision he had to make wasn't just about geography or numbers. It was about roots and fruit, about depth and reach, about building skyscrapers or cultivating gardens. The sun was rising when Robert finally finished writing his reply. In a few hours he would have to announce his decision, but first he had a more important stop to make. The children were waiting for him for another day of classes at the center. The morning of the grand opening arrived with a gentle breeze swaying the colorful flags hung all around the educational center. Robert straightened his tie, the same one he'd worn the day he first came to the village, as he watched the finishing touches from his office window. His phone vibrated relentlessly. Gregory Matthews was awaiting his final answer about Singapore. On the screen, an email stood ready to send but still unsent. Robert drew a deep breath, putting the phone in his pocket. Today, other matters took priority. The courtyard was already crowded when he went down. Entire families had come early, dressed in their best clothes. Children dashed back and forth, some making last-minute adjustments to their posters and presentations. "Mr. Robert," Emily popped up, clasping his hand. "Are you nervous?" "We practiced so hard for the surprise." Before he could reply, Maria appeared, taking charge as usual. "Emily, back to your spot. We're about to start." The ceremony began with the raising of 2 flags, one for the country and another, designed by the children, featuring symbols of community and education. John had poured all his talent into that design, every detail telling a story. Father Joseph opened with a short but profound blessing. Then, to everyone's surprise, Lucas took the makeshift stage. The once timid boy who rarely spoke in public now held the microphone with confidence. "When I was little," he began, drawing laughs from the audience. He was still little. "I thought dreams were like stars, pretty to look at but impossible to reach. Then Mr. Robert came, and we learned dreams are more like seeds. If you plant them right and care for them every day, they grow and become real." One by one, other students took the stage to share their stories. Pedro used his unique math method to show the community's incredible progress. "Before," he explained, moving his colored stones, "it was just one person teaching many. Now, each person who learns becomes another teacher. It's like a math of kindness. It only multiplies." Maria, who had organized most of the event, presented future plans for the center. Her confidence made Robert think back to her early days as a shy little girl and realize how far she'd come, how far they all had come. "Our school isn't just a building," she declared. "It's a promise we made to each other. Never stop learning and never stop teaching." Then came the moment the children had kept a secret. The lights dimmed and gentle music started playing. On a screen, images began to roll, photographs of the very first day Robert arrived, scenes from the first improvised lessons, kids studying under a tree, and community efforts to rebuild the school. Emily's recorded voice narrated, "Once upon a time, there was a man who lived in a glass tower. He had everything money could buy, but his heart was empty. So until one day, he discovered that true wealth doesn't live in vaults, but in the smiles of children learning to read." The slideshow continued, showing the center's evolution, walls going up, the library coming to life, the garden thriving. Each photo was paired with testimonies from the children and their families. "I used to be embarrassed that I couldn't read, Mr. Joseph's voice rang out. "Now I learn alongside my son, and there's no greater pride." Robert's eyes blurred with tears as the story reached the present. John had animated his drawings so they came alive, showing a future where the center expanded and neighboring communities adopted the same model, creating an endless cycle of hope and knowledge. When the lights came back on, Emily stood on stage holding a book. "This was the first book I read by myself," she announced, her small voice resonating with strength. "It's about a girl who discovers she can change the world through words. And you know what I learned, Mr. Robert? That sometimes we need someone to believe in us before we believe in ourselves." In that instant, Robert knew with crystal clarity what his heart had decided long ago. He rose and stepped onto the stage, taking the microphone from Emily's hands. "In the past few days," he began, his voice shaky with emotion, "I've faced a tough choice. I received an offer to take this project to other countries, an amazing opportunity to help countless communities." A murmur ran through the crowd. He saw Emily's eyes widen, suddenly realizing that he might leave. But last night, reading the first words Emily ever wrote, I understood something fundamental. It's not buildings that change lives, it's the connections we create, the roots we plant, the time we spend watching each seed grow. He pulled out his phone, and before everyone, he hit send on the drafted email, his formal refusal of the Singapore offer. I've decided to stay, he announced, prompting an uproar of cheers from the crowd. Because here I learned that success isn't measured by numbers or the size of your territory, but by the sparkle in a child's eyes who just learned how to read, by the confidence of a father who returns to his studies, by the courage of a community that writes its own story. Emily was the first to rush up and hug him, followed by a wave of children that nearly toppled him on the stage. Adults rose to their feet, applauding and wiping their tears. Even Mrs. Constance, typically reserved, wiped her cheeks unashamedly. But, he continued once he could stand, that doesn't mean we'll just settle for what we have. Maria is already planning to train teachers in other communities. Pedro developed a teaching method that can help schools all across the region. John will turn our stories into illustrated books to inspire other villages. The celebration that followed went far beyond the official inauguration. It was a celebration of choice, not just Robert's, but that of an entire community deciding to turn dreams into reality. Late in the afternoon, as families still celebrated in the courtyard, Robert found a quiet moment in the library. He stopped in front of the huge tree John had painted, now covered with the names of the first students. "Mr. Robert," Emily's voice called from the door. She was holding something in her hands. "I made this for you." It was a simple drawing, Robert sitting under the mango tree, surrounded by children. Across the top, in her now confident handwriting, were the words, "Sometimes we think we're teaching, but we're really learning." "You know, Emily," he said, taking the drawing carefully, "when I first arrived here, I thought I knew everything about success and achievements, but you all taught me the most important thing." "What's that?" she asked, curious. "That sometimes the simplest dreams have the deepest roots." Outside, the sun set over the village, painting the sky the same colors as the flags decorating the center. Robert heard the children's laughter, the adults chatting, and soft music someone was strumming on a guitar. His phone buzzed one last time, another email from Gregory Matthews, but Robert didn't open it. Instead, he grabbed his camera and stepped outside to capture another moment with his new family, because now he knew, beyond any doubt, that he had found his true place in the world. Not in a glass tower, not in high-rise offices in Singapore, but there, where dreams took root in red soil, watered by the hope of children who had shown him the true meaning of success. And that was exactly how Robert Anderson discovered that sometimes the greatest change starts with the smallest hands. Hands eager to write a new chapter, not only in their own story, but in his as well.